Hello folks, it's Grandpop here, and it's Grandpop reads Puddle Lane, and today we're going to be reading Tessa in Puddle Lane. She has a little bit of an adventure. Oh, and I forgot to say, this is Georgie. Say hello, Georgie.
Hello.
Okay, so Tessa in Puddle Lane from the Puddle Lane series, Stage 2. Ooh, the green books. And here we have as a reminder, here's Puddle Lane. And at the end you can just see the magician's house in the top corner. Okay? And we've got a little starting picture here. Tessa getting ready to go under the railings into Puddle Lane. Ooh. So here we go. Tessa in Puddle Lane. One day Tessa was out in the garden playing by herself. Pegs had gone out to look for food. Tim was asleep. Tessa chased a leaf that was blowing in the wind. The leaf blew through the gates into Puddle Lane. Tessa stood at the gates and looked down the lane. Here she is. The leaf's blowing down the lane. Where am I going? There we go. And there's Tessa peeping out under the gate. Okay. She could see people in the lane, but they didn't look dangerous. I'll go out into the lane. I'll find out who lives there, Tessa said to herself. It looks very interesting. So she went under the gate and out into Puddle Lane. And here you can see her going under the gate on this picture here. Where's we going? That one. And then into Puddle Lane. And you can see the people in the street in Puddle Lane as well. So let's see what happens next. The first person she saw close to was Mr. Go-to-Bed. It was a fine day, and the sun was shining down on Puddle Lane. Mr. Go-to-Bed had carried a chair out into the sunshine. Now, why do you suppose Mr. Go-to-Bed had done that? To go to sleep, of course. He was sitting on the chair in the lane, and he was fast asleep. There we go. Sitting on the chair in the lane, fast asleep, Mr. Go-to-Bed. Tessa went past Mr. Go-to-Bed very quietly so that she wouldn't wake him up. She went on down the lane. She saw Mr. Puffle at the door of his house. Mr. Puffle was carrying a ladder. He set the ladder down in the lane. Then he picked up a brush and a tin of green paint and climbed up the ladder. There he is, a tin of green paint on the ground, Tessa sitting looking, and Mr. Puffle getting ready to climb the ladder. Wonder what happens soon. Tessa watched Mr. Puffle for a few minutes. Mr. Puffle opened the tin of green paint and began to paint the window over the door of his house. Not the glass, of course, the wooden bits in between. Tessa went on down the lane whilst Mr. Puffle painted the window, standing on his ladder. And off went Tessa. She was halfway down the lane when she saw Mrs. Pitter-Patter. We remember Mrs. Pitter-Patter, don't we? Mrs. Pitter-Patter was out in the lane. She had no one to talk to, so she was talking to herself. She was cleaning her windows and talking hard as she worked. So here's Mrs. Pitter-Patter, busy cleaning her windows and talking away to herself as Tessa goes quietly by. Tessa stopped to look at Mrs. Pitter-Patter, but Mrs. Pitter-Patter took no notice of her. So as Tessa went on down the lane, she came to the end of the lane and looked out into the street. Through the archway into the street. There she is looking out. A big dog was coming down the street. Tessa didn't know it, but the dog lived in the house at the end of Puddle Lane. Tessa saw the dog. The dog saw Tessa. Uh-oh. The dog gave a great woof and began to run. He was running straight towards her. This could be trouble. Tessa had never seen a dog before, but she was very frightened. She fled. Tessa ran back up Puddle Lane as fast as she could run. She's charging up Puddle Lane, trying to avoid the terrifying dog. And of course there's people in Puddle Lane, and she's going to run right towards them. Tessa could run fast, but the big dog could run faster. As she came to Mrs. Pitter-Patter's house, the dog was close behind her. At that moment, Mrs. Pitter-Patter stepped back into the lane to admire her clean windows. Tessa ran round Mrs. Pitter-Patter, but the dog was running too fast. He's chasing Tessa. She runs round behind Mrs. Pitter-Patter. He bumped into Mrs. Pitter-Patter and he sent her flying. Mrs. Pitter-Patter's legs flew up in the air and she sat down hard on the dog. "Woof!" said the dog as she knocked all the breath out of him. Ooh, that looks a bit painful, doesn't it? Poor dog. It's his own fault though, isn't it? What happened next? Tessa didn't stop to see what was happening. She fled up the lane as fast as she could. The dog picked himself up. He got his breath back and ran after Tessa. Tessa ran on. She came to Mr. Puffle's house. Mr. Puffle was standing on the ladder. Uh-oh! He was still painting the window. Tessa skidded under the ladder and ran on up the lane. The dog was too big to go under the ladder. He tried to, but when he did, he took the ladder with him. Look at the silly big dog trying to charge under the ladder with Mr. Puffle still on it. The ladder fell over. The tin of paint fell off. Poor Mr. Puffle fell down with a crash. The green paint fell all over the dog. Tessa heard the crash. She looked back. The dog was green. I'll serve him right, won't it? There we go. Poor doggie's got a tin of green paint on his head as Tessa runs off, and poor Mr. Puffle's landed hard on the ground. Tessa didn't wait. She ran up the lane as fast as she could. The dog picked himself up. He shook himself hard. He shook green paint all over poor Mr. Puffle. Then he saw Tessa and he ran off after her as fast as he could. Look at that naughty dog shaking paint all over Mr. Puffle's clothes here. Where are we? Here. Yes, there. Oh dear. He'll be in trouble. Tessa came to Mr. Go-to-Bed's house. She was very near to the garden, but the dog was close behind her. She hadn't time to get under the gate. Mr. Go-to-Bed was still sitting in his chair. He was fast asleep. Uh-oh, I sense more trouble coming. There's Mr. Go-to-Bed snoozing away as ever. That's all he ever does. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Tessa took a flying leap through the air. She jumped right onto Mr. Go-to-Bed. Mr. Go-to-Bed woke with a shout. Whoa! Suddenly, as Tessa landed on him, that must be a bit of a shock. Can you see Tessa there? She's landed right on Mr. Go-to-Bed. Oh dear, and the dog's still chasing, covered in green paint as well. The dog was running so fast that he couldn't stop. He crashed into Mr. Go-to-Bed's chair. The chair fell over, and Mr. Go-to-Bed fell over too. Tessa didn't stop to see what happened next. She ran under the gate and into the garden. Oh dear, more trouble and chaos. This dog's going to be in trouble, isn't he? What a mess. Poor Mr. Go-to-Bed. Tessa hid behind the wall and peeped back through the gate. She could see Mr. Go-to-Bed and the dog. Mr. Go-to-Bed was on his feet. He had picked up his stick and he was shaking it at the dog. As Tessa watched, the dog turned tail and went back down the lane. I'm not sure if the dog was scared or just embarrassed for what he'd done. Now you see Tessa in the middle, peeping out under the gate, safe and sound, back in the magician's garden, and a very angry Mr. Go-to-Bed. As she was going into the hole under the steps, Tessa saw Pegs. "Where have you been, Tessa?" said Pegs. "I've been out in the lane," said Tessa. "I met a big monster and the monster chased me. I don't think I'll go in the lane again." "That's not a monster," said Pegs, "that's a dog. And you needn't run away. Just arch your back and spit at him." "Tss." "I'll go with you next time," said Tessa. "Or I'll go with you next time," said Tessa, rather. And there she is, telling Pegs, her mum, what happened. And that's the end of the story. And there's Tessa and Tim and Pegs in the garden. What are they doing? Can you see? Maybe they're playing a game. Anyway, that's the end of Tessa in Puddle Lane. And that's all just now from Grandpop until the next Puddle Lane story. So, it's bye bye. Bye bye.